And Alhamdulillah, we're recording. So, Jazakallah khair for coming on. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So, I'm really thankful for you coming on today. I massively enjoy your lectures and your whole, your kind of online presence in your videos. You know, mashallah, you put out a lot of beneficial content where you're talking about really important issues. So, I guess we'll just start with where did your journey begin? Where does the story start?
I guess you mean my journey of Islam, or there's so many journeys within the journeys within the journeys, bro.
Okay, what about where did you grow up?
I mean, I grew up in well, I mean, again, I mean, my early, very, very early home before I remember was I was born in Tanzania. I don't remember any of that. We left when I was 2 years old, so I don't have any memory at all of it. But my early childhood was spent in London, well, on the outskirts, the suburbs of London, in a suburb called Chiswick, which is just off. Well, it's sort of the M4 runs, you know, between on the way to Heathrow runs, you know, sort of either Chiswick is either side of it, on the outskirts. So I that's where I went to school. Went to school in London, early school. But when I was like 10 years old, I was sent to a boarding school. And my dad was posted to Egypt. He was working for Barclays Bank International, and he went to Egypt, that's where he worked for 10 years of his life. So from the age of 9 to 19, I went from boarding school in Yorkshire to holidays in Egypt.
Was it a culture shock going from, you know?
Yeah, huge.
What was kind of, I suppose this is probably your first introduction to actually seeing Islamic lifestyle and such.
Yeah, for sure.
What was your thoughts of it upon first seeing it? Because in Egypt, they play the azan 5 times a day. And
yeah, it was very, very challenging. You know, I didn't like it at first at all, because things were really, really different. And I guess maybe I was just going through, I didn't like school either. Generally, I just didn't like school. I wasn't very happy being a boarder and being at boarding school. But after the first couple of years, it switched really hugely from being a place I just didn't like to the place I loved most on the planet. I loved it.
Oh, really?
I loved the people. I loved the lifestyle. You know, it was I had an amazing life there. And although it was a very privileged life being a Westerner, and on the other hand, you know, even my interaction with the local people was really good, really positive. My image of, you know, the Egyptian people is and still is a really, really good one. And the generally very kind, loving, full of humor, people who are full of humor, laughing, smiling, and like nothing seems to really get them down. I guess that's what really impressed me, is that a lot of people had very little. But despite having very little, they seemed really happy, which is, of course, a big contradiction in the sense that, you know, in Western society, we were taught that happiness in life comes from, you know, material things and having a nice house and having a nice car. And everything I was seeing was saying, well, that's a lie, because I could see lots of people who had nice things, who had material possessions, who weren't really particularly happy. And I was seeing people who had really virtually nothing who were extremely happy. So that was an existential crisis, because very early on in my life, there was an existential crisis going on, because you know, on some level, I realized that I was being taught a lie.
So at this period in your life where you're kind of noticing this transition, what was your spirituality at this point?
Well, I mean, I was going to a monastic boarding school, so I was quite religious in the sense that I had a religious sensibility. I don't know how seriously I took religion. It was between feeling there was something generally serious about it, to on the other hand, pretty much taking quite a lot of it as a joke. I guess when you're at school and sort of religious practice is intermixed quite a lot with your whole school life, often it was just a opportunity to mess around, to be silly, to do all sorts of crazy, stupid things. I mean, I avoided, whenever I could avoid going to mass or whenever I could avoid attending any sort of thing like that, I'd sit in my room because no one really checked on you. But funnily enough, despite that, I felt quite religious. I felt that I loved the idea of people who dedicate themselves to God. I liked the idea of worshiping God. I thought there was a lot of cool stuff that Jesus said. But I guess what really confused me and put me off was more about the doctrine, certain doctrines of the Catholic Church. So it's sort of weird. There was a lot of positive stuff, but a lot of negative stuff all at the same time.
Sure.
But it didn't translate into me being overtly religious or, being someone like fanatically dedicated to religious practice. But in terms of a belief in God, in terms of believing that there was a day of judgment, prophets, so on, I mean, I had that sort of belief. But despite that, I didn't really find that there was any fundamental answer to the big question, like, why are we here? What's the purpose of life? What's it all for? And because of that, I just started looking through different religions, different ideas, especially Buddhism, which sort of took me on a journey, basically, through different religions. Which, alhamdulillah, I guess, to cut the huge long story short, there's no point in me repeating it, bro, because it's like anyone can type in YouTube Abdurraheem Green, how he came to Islam, and like they can find the whole story. So it's just like super boring for me to go over it for the 700th time.
Sure.
Yeah, unless you got some particularly insightful, clever question that no one has ever asked me before. Like it's my definition of boring going through this subject, bro.
Well, subhanAllah, it just shows your story has been that interesting that enough people want you to hear it, that you can tell your story 700 times. And that's awesome,
Yeah,
mashallah.
it's not really interesting to me. I mean, it may be interesting. It's not interesting to me anymore, which is a bit sad. But, I can see people find it interesting. But I just generally say, watch the YouTube video. If you really want to know, watch the YouTube video. Like, take your pick out of the 40 different ones that are available there. I don't know how many, but yeah.
Mashallah. So what's that like having, kind of not just entering Islam, but having a story that was so many people wanted to hear? And like, was that something that, I don't know.
I don't think there's anything remarkable about my story particularly. I just think people like hearing revert stories. Maybe it's because of my background, because I come from more of a middle class background. There's not that many, middle upper class sort of people who become Muslim, at least not obviously and overtly. So maybe that's a bit more of a rarity. Maybe that's why people find it interesting. And I guess for people with who have an experience of European colonialism, or more specifically, British colonialism, we should probably call it Scottish colonialism, because most of the colonial activity was really done by Scots. They were the big colonizers. Most of the soldiers and the great engineers and the people who really drove the British Empire forward. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Obviously
I wasn't aware of that.
Huh?
I wasn't aware of that. I'll need to look into that.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. So yeah, I'm actually quarter Scottish. My grandmother was Scottish.
Oh, amazing, mashallah.
Yeah, my dad's mum was Scottish.
Okay, great.
So I'm Scottish, like quite a lot Scottish in there.
Yeah.
So I think so. People obviously are fascinated that the former colonizer, has given up their religion and become Muslim. That's I would find that interesting
Yeah.
if I was in that situation. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an English teacher, and I have a lot of students. So I teach English to people who are learning as a second language, and a lot of them, ask me about Scotland and if I'd recommend coming to Scotland, and they ask me what there's to see. And some of, like, I'd say what Scotland is best for is kind of nature and the architecture, and some of the most impressive architecture are in two different kinds of buildings, and that is the castles and the churches. The castles and the churches, they just look phenomenal. They look like something straight out of a movie. In fact, that's why so many film companies come here to make movies. But a lot of the churches now, like really big, tremendous, beautiful looking ones, they're being turned into like nightclubs, into bars, into restaurants, where people are probably getting up to all kinds of unfavorable behaviors. So I think it's quite apparent that people, I don't think it was like that 50 years ago, from my understanding. I think it's more of a recent phenomenon that there's all these massive churches, but they're empty.
Yeah. It's a phenomenon, that's for sure, bro. It was happening. This stuff was beginning to happen in England even when I was a kid. The spread of irreligiosity has been very, very dramatic, very, very dramatic, and the decline of Christianity in any real meaningful sense. I mean, people will call themselves Christian, but there's no practice there. There's no the idea of going to church and this type of stuff. It's just not there for people.
It's one thing that I'm kind of worried about with the Muslims, because just now as the churches are being turned into nightclubs and bars and such, I'd hate to think that would ever be a masjid. May Allah protect us from that. So it just shows to an extent of how important it is that we're regularly attending it.
I'm sure it will happen, because the Prophet said you'll follow those people who came before you step by step, handspan by handspan. If one of them went in a lizard's hole, one of you will do the same. Wow. So that's how exactly what they do we're going to end up doing. So maybe not to the same extent, but it will happen, I'm sure, unfortunately. I mean, it's already happens in Palestine, in Israel. They take religious buildings, they've taken mosques, and and it's happened across the the Balkans, where places where Turkey, the Ottomans used to rule, but it's been abandoned, and mosques have been turned into all sorts of things, including nightclubs and stuff like that. So it is happening, albeit in a different way. Not so much because people are leaving Islam because they've been forcefully expelled or whatever, but it's happened. And even more crazy, bro, is that people in their enthusiasm to do good have built mosques in places like Africa, where in fact, in reality, there's not really any Muslim communities. And we know of masjids that have been built there, by people thinking they're going to get sadaqah jariyah, hoping that they're going to be, filled with Muslims praying. And actually they're being used as pigsties, some of them. So this is a masjid built, something built as a masjid, and people keeping their pigs in them because there's no Muslims. It's a problem, bro. One of the problems is that, people don't realize that what's a building? A building is nothing. You have to educate people, right? You have to lift their hearts. You have to fill their souls. That's really what that's really what Islam is about. That's what true religion is about. True religion is building people, building their souls. That's what it's about. It's about the reformation of the human being. But it's very easy to build a building, and we live in a time when there are many immigrants who are Muslims. So the reality is that a lot of the masajid are getting filled up with these new arrivals, but a lot of the time you don't see the younger generation there. Apart from it, because they're not really welcome, they don't feel welcome. There's nothing to connect them. I still can't believe it that we're saying this, but we still have imams in this country who don't speak English. It's unbelievable, but it's true.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's incredible. So kind of on a lighter topic, I guess. So see, with your religious journey, and this is a question I extend to all of my guests, but yours is sort of unique because you didn't come straight to Islam. Islam, I think, offers a lot of kind of evidence and proof that this religion, this book, it's by the person who created the universe. So the more we look at the universe, the more we should kind of see a coherence between the way the world works and what was written in this book.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, Muslims, alhamdulillah, can kind of take solace in that and confidence that this faith is in fact from God. But what were some of the I guess biggest points for you, because there's a lot of different things in the Quran, there's a lot of different things about this religion, whether it be the prophecies, whether it be about the
Yeah,
signs.
I don't think, I mean, some of that stuff did stand out to me, and I have to say I do remember when I first read the Quran, some of that stuff stood out to me. I was amazed that, for example, I do remember the verses in the Quran talking about the mountains having roots, that you know the mountains have roots lest the earth shake with you. And I remember being quite amazed by that, because I used to study geography, and for A level, and I really actually loved geography. So there were certain things that I was quite amazed at, how the Quran seemed to be talking about stuff that it was a bit weird to think, how did someone know stuff like this all those years ago?
Yeah,
like,
of course.
I didn't really think about it that much, but it sort of did register in my mind, like, wait a minute, that's amazing. And I think one of the things about the Quran is, I wouldn't say it's scientific. That's not right to say that. Yeah. But it does seem to be very modern. Yeah, I would say modern in the way that it talks about the universe, right? It doesn't seem to be full of sort of, what can I say, mumbo jumbo, sort of weird, sort of, the stars of the campfires of the gods, or, the earth is resting on an elephant which is standing in the tortoise which is swimming in the sea, right? It doesn't have that type of stuff.
Sure.
It talks about the heavens and the earth were one piece, and then they were rent asunder, and sort of stuff like that. So the descriptions, when it's talking about nature, it seems to be sort of very modern, in a way that sort of actually is quite challenging for us to understand how was that the case. But I would say that that's not the thing that really impressed me the most initially. The thing that impressed me about reading the Quran, or at least you could say the translation of it, was actually two things. Number one was what the Quran says about God. That was the first thing. Because for me, I guess one of the things I didn't like about Buddhism, and that I always thought was problematic, is that it didn't have anything to say about God. And that was a problem for me. Although philosophically, and as a sort of psychological, philosophical state of being, and it still is actually very appealing. It has some really, really appealing dimensions to it. And there's no doubt that there is some seriously deep psychological insights within the Buddhist tradition. And Buddha definitely came to some profound understandings, but fundamentally, I found quite a few things not satisfying about Buddhism, and one of them was the absence of some communication, recognition, connection with the Creator. And obviously, the Quran is full of, and from the point of view of Christianity, one of the things that drove me away from Christianity was its very confusing idea about God, and most specifically the concept that Jesus is God.
Sure.
And that definitely drove the Trinity, and that type of stuff definitely drove me away from Christianity. And what I found was, when I read the Quran, it was a description of God that just intuitively made absolute sense, and that in many ways answered so many questions that I had in such a simple, profound, easy way. It was just almost sort of like, like almost too easy, but it was just simple and easy to understand, and made so much sense. And it was like, this is exactly how it should be. And the other thing was, I was very impressed with the rich descriptions of the day of judgment, the paradise, and the hellfire. So the fact that the Quran talks a lot about the afterlife, for me, was extremely powerful. because, you know, as a Christian, you're taught to believe that there's a day of judgment, a paradise, and a hellfire, but there's virtually nothing in the whole of the Bible. I don't even think if you put all the passages talking about the afterlife in the Bible, gathered them all together, it wouldn't fill a single page,
Really?
right? I don't think it would fill one single page, right? And yet this is what's supposed to happen to us for eternity. So I think this is another thing that really intuitively impressed me about the Quran. And there were other things, to be honest, in terms of its structure and its language. And even though, you know, I wasn't reading it in Arabic, but even in English, I could see that there was a particular structure and a way, although it wasn't easy to read. The Quran was not an easy book to read. And it's not because I had problems reading. I was a very avid reader. You know, if the Quran was any other book, I would have finished it in 3 hours or 4 hours. I was reading it for 2 weeks and I still hadn't finished it because it was so hard for me to get my head around. And I was used to reading, by the way, you know, Khalil Gibran, you know, the poet, the Lebanese poet. I was used to reading, you know, Zen Buddhist couplets and stuff like that.
Not easy
So it wasn't like it wasn't that I wasn't familiar with, you know, contemplative, religious, you know, discourse. It's just the Quran. I wanted to understand it. And in order to understand it, I had to think really hard. And that's why I had to it was just really, really difficult for me to get through it, but in a very positive way.
See, when you first came to Islam, were there particular points that you stagnated with, particular points where like you couldn't wrap your head around? Because see, like as we were talking about, you know, kind of Muslim youth not coming to the mosques and stuff, and I see one issue for that being is in our secular society, there's a certain kind of guidance on this is right, this is wrong, this is how we should live, this is how we should act. And then see when we see what Islam prescribes, in a lot of cases, it's actually contrary to what most people are practicing kind of in modern times. I think for some younger Muslims who haven't had the education, they look at that and they just assume that the way they've been living is the correct way. And it's really a hard transition. It really takes kind of deliberation and open-mindedness in order to accept and adapt to what the Quran is instead prescribing. So did you have any points like that initially you maybe struggled with?
Quite the opposite, because I'd already concluded previously that the Western ideal was a lie. It was politically, it was a lie. I mean, everything about the West and its ideology was a lie. And this is way before I was Muslim, I concluded that. It was just nothing but hypocrisy and lies. And the whole idea that materialism is some path to happiness, I knew was a lie. Because I'd experienced that in Egypt. I'd seen it with my eyes that was just nonsense. And I knew it from my own life because I had an extremely materialistic, you know, I didn't lack for anything in my life materialistically. I mean, when I say I didn't lack for anything, okay, I didn't have my own personal desert island. I didn't have a yacht and a personal jet. I mean, do you see how ridiculous that is? Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, but anything else, right? I literally was not lacking. Yeah. I mean, subhanAllah, I was just up on my, you know, Instagram feed. This advert popped up for a family holiday in the Maldives. And it reminded me of the holidays that my dad, may Allah rest his soul, may Allah bless him, used to take us on.
Amen.
And we used to go to these resorts, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was an amazing, beautiful, fun time. I loved it as a kid, as a teenager. I had a really good life, an amazingly good life from a materialistic point of view. But despite that, I wasn't really happy. I was not fundamentally happy. I mean, these things were amazing because they served as distractions from my fundamental malaise, my fundamental angst, the anxiety that I had, which was the existential anxiety. It's like, what is the purpose of life? What's it all for? Right? It may be amazing and fantastic, but why? What's it all leading to? You know, where do you get the next high from?
Mm-hmm.
And and so that and other things, I suppose, there's many things about the Western life, many things about the Western life that I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemies. The whole courting ritual, the whole girlfriend, boyfriend relation shouldn't be called relationship. It should be called relation, SHIT. Yeah. Because literally it's horrific,
Yep.
right? It's the most horrific
It's very
thing.
ugly.
Yeah,
That.
it's ugly,
Yep.
it's nasty. And you know, the thing is that I got a YouTube video on it. It's called Love, Sex, and Marriage, right? Where I talk about sex as a bonding mechanism and how important it is. I mean, I'm not going to repeat the whole thing. People can listen to that if
Sure.
they're interested in this whole subject, right? But you know, like your nature is, you know, I believe that human beings naturally, sex is a bonding mechanism to help you stay together to raise kids, right? That's, I'm sorry to say, it's not supposed to be there just simply, it's fun. Of course, it's fun and it's amazing fun and it's extremely pleasurable, right? But it's not supposed to be there for recreation. And if you use sex as recreation,
Become a
and
junkie.
especially when you have multiple partners, one after the other, on one
Sure.
night stands, you actually then destroy one of the most powerful bonding mechanisms that you have. And but what unfortunately what happens, you become very damaged because you have to desensitize yourself. I mean, you're having sex with someone, which creates these incredible, intense emotions of love and attachment, and then you don't see the person the next day. What is that doing to you psychologically? What does that do to kids? What does that do to society? What does that do to everybody?
Yeah, there's
Um,
actually studies that have been done which have showed graphs of I can send it to you after this if you want, but it showed from the 1960s to modern day, and it showed for a woman the average sexual partner was like one or less prior to
yeah,
marriage, and then now like it kind of shows like the percentage of women that had one or less up to like 10 or more sexual partners for marriage,
yeah,
and back at that period like 10 or more was like 1% or something. It was very rare
mm,
for someone to go to that extent. And then it shows modern times, and those numbers have significantly increased, women having two sexual partners, three sexual partners, five sexual partners, or 10 sexual partners and more. And then also the graph shows the increase in divorce. It shows the
mm,
increase in depression. It shows an increase in sexually transmitted diseases.
yeah. Building a family, right? As anyone knows who's embarked upon that particular journey and adventure in life, is extremely challenging in the best of circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we are definitely not helping ourselves, right? For men and women, it's not like a women thing, right? Men and women, anybody who has had a youth of sexual adventure, right? And then is going to have to live a monogamous one man, one woman relationship, right? Which generally you almost have to do in order to raise children in a
Yeah.
stable environment. Some people, okay, I know some people live alternative lifestyles. They do, and they manage it. You know, they do manage it. I'm not going to lie, they do, right? But most people would really struggle with that because it's not really built into us, right? So unfortunately, that whether you believe in science or religion, I think the conclusion is the same. Whether you believe in evolution or whether you believe that God has prescribed a certain way for us to live, in this particular instant, the two things are pretty much the same. The conclusions are the same,
Sure.
right? In the sense that the way of life that God has prescribed for us, generally, and you find this in monotheistic religions, in most religions, and what people have been practicing for millennium and millennium as human beings, right, in terms of morality, is the same thing, right? And all of this is being thrown out of the window in a generation. How do you think we human beings are going to cope
Wow.
with that? We're not going to cope with it. It's going to be very ugly. It's very interesting. But this is actually the history of the fall of civilization. There's a book, I have it in my library. I keep thinking it might take me time to find it. And I can't remember the title of the book. I was listening to some podcast and someone had mentioned this book. And it's a massive book that's been written by an academic about how basically you can predict the destruction of a civilization based upon the basically when marriage breaks down and people start fornicating. So when people start having sex out of marriage and that becomes common, yeah, when it becomes common for people to have sex outside of marriage, he said within 3 generations, society will collapse. And he said he studied all of these societies throughout history, modern and ancient throughout history. And he said it happens with boring predictability. People are obviously going to say, he said, people will say this time it's different. Well, there's nothing to make us think it's different because you can study it again and again and again. And that's what the evidence leads to. When that happens, society, it's got 3 generations. That's what it's got. And we're pretty much already, on the 2nd generation here, right? So yeah, I mean, and there's reasons for that, really, really good, sound reasons. So from my perspective, no, I didn't find a struggle with what Islam was saying at all. It made absolute perfect sense to me. To live a goodly life, a godly life, to live a life centered around obeying God, and also controlling. Because the other thing I realize is that every single religious tradition, what is the one thing that all religions, including Buddhism, every one of them has in common? The one thing they all have in common is they are all a system through which and by which you regulate your impulses, you regulate your passions, you regulate your desires. It is about building your willpower, your ability to control your short-term impulses in order to reach some long-term goals. That's what it's all about. It's about self-regulation. It's about willpower. And that's a huge, I have a whole course on that online on willpower, right?
Where can people find it?
The ability for a child to control themselves is the only reliable predictor of a child's future success in life. Basically, nothing else predicts a child's, like everything else. It doesn't, wealthy family background, divorce, even child abuse. None of these things accurately predict what's going to happen to a child later on in life. The only thing is actually the ability to self-regulate. If a child can resist temptation, the likelihood is that when they grow up, they're going to have better jobs, better family life, a better life all round. They're going to be more balanced. They're going to save more money, like all what you think are the basic, benchmarks of having a sort of successful, balanced life. They will have it. They are more empathetic. They're more understanding. They have more self-control. They're less likely to take drugs and become, and to become alcoholics because it's all self-regulation. You see, so the all religious traditions help teach self-regulation. They're bedrocks of what civilization is built upon. That's the bedrock. So yeah, but we live in a society now that's all about, do what you want, do what you feel like, be what you want. If you feel like you're a man, you feel like a woman, become a woman. If you feel like everything's do what you feel like, because you feel like this and you feel like that, you should be able to do what you feel. No civilization in the history of whole of humanity ever was built upon that. Okay, it's all built. That's what civilization is. Civilization, by its very definition, is the ability of human beings to regulate their passions and their impulses and to be able to live together in a way that we can mutually understand and support each other.
What an amazing answer.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. Another thing I wanted to touch on you with is the importance and the purpose of having spirituality and of worship. And this is kind of the analogy I give to non-Muslims. is that, see, when you start exercising, the body just feels better. Like everything feels better when you exercise. Like there's a kind of like your body's uplifted. And I think it's the same about educating yourself. See, when you learn new things and you start thinking in a better way, or you gather more knowledge which is actually useful to you and you like, again, it's something else which is it uplifts you, it makes you feel better. I think the same about spirituality. Like the disciplines of the body, or of exercise and of diet, the disciplines of the mind, or controlling your thoughts and educating yourself, and then the discipline kind of the soul is prayer, and we have salah and these spiritual exercises, and actually makes you feel better. Like there's something, if you're not doing this, there's actually something lacking. So what's kind of like your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a very nice analogy. I call, I talk about spiritual athleticism, becoming a spiritual athlete. This is the example I give. I said Islam is like a spiritual, it's like training you to be a spiritual athlete. But in the sense, in a way that really everyone needs to aspire to. Everyone needs to, like this is another ridiculous thing. It's ridiculous when people say, I don't like organized religion. It's one of those things that's so stupid, right? It because it's an oxymoron, right? It's sort of like I'm trying to think of something that is, comparably ridiculous, but like,
hey, you with me?
I'm really sorry, I just don't know what happened.
That's okay. You left off on people who say they don't like organized religion, and you said it was a ridiculous oxymoron.
Yeah, because religion is supposed to be organized. Mm-hmm. It is a system through which and by which you can regulate your impulses. It's supposed to be organized. That's how you create discipline, through systems.
Through order, yeah, not chaos.
Through order and systems. So like I was talking about I was reflecting on the world of athletics or of athleticism. There's barely a sport today, even there were sports that you could say when they started, they were extreme sports, and it was just almost raw talent and just natural athletic ability. But I mean, today, the level of competition in almost every sphere, it doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're mountain biking or skiing or snowboarding, like these guys are probably spending a lot of them more time in the gym than they do on their bikes or on their snowboard or on their skis, right? And they have to regulate what they eat, they regulate what they drink, they probably even regulate how much sex they have, right? Everything is regulated. I know a little bit because, two of my kids for a while were racing mountain bikes downhill, and downhill is considered to be sort of the hard man, wild, side of the sport. But these guys, they may put on the image of swigging away lots of beer and, getting drunk, but that's not what they were doing. Yeah, they weren't doing that. These guys were the top athletes in that sport. Were they were in the gym, had very, very precisely controlled diets. Most of them have personal trainers. Many of them even have now psychologists, right? Wow. To teach them. So it's just not a joke. If you want to be the top of your sport, you can't be just messing around. You can't be doing it. You can't reach the top. You can't even forget the top. You can't even get into the race, the start line.
Sure.
You can't even get to qualify. It's so competitive.
Yeah, that point is amazing, and it is such like a ridiculous point people make about hating organized religion. And here's another point that I hear people say. Like, I've heard people give this criticism. They say, I don't mind people being religious, but see, as soon as you tell me what's right, or you try to give me your religion, like, I've had enough and I just want to listen to it. I kind of find that like the idea of, or another one is when people say you're not perfect, so you can't talk about the religion. or you can't tell me what to do because you're not perfect, or because you have sinned or you have lived this lifestyle. I know you're not perfect, so you can't tell me what to do. And you know, the kind of Islamic idea is that, well, we might not be perfect, but alhamdulillah, the Quran is perfect, our religion is perfect. And I think this is harder said than done for anyone, but even if someone was like had the reputation of a sinner, if that person told you that you're committing a sin objectively, like, we shouldn't say, oh, he's a sinner, so he's wrong. We should think, well, am I committing a sin? Is what I've done against the Quran or the Sunnah?
Well, the person could argue I'm more qualified to talk about this because I've experienced the evil effects of doing this sin, and I know how bad it is, and I know how destructive it is. So I'm warning you about it, right?
Really great.
If I'm an alcoholic, does that not mean that I have the right to tell you how dangerous it is to be an alcoholic? And I could say to you, listen, I'm an alcoholic, and I really recommend you don't go down that line because it's horrible.
Oh, absolutely.
So the idea that because someone's committing a sin, they don't have the right to talk about it is just nonsense. But these things are people who just want to follow their desires. That's all it is. It's just arrogance, it's pride, it's shaitan, and they just don't want to hear it because you're making them, people look, the thing is, brothers and sisters, at the end of the day, bro, no one, like, sometimes people don't want to look at most people don't want to look in the mirror. They don't like what they see. Right? They don't like what they see. People won't look into themselves. People spend a lot of time, a lot of energy, most of their lives, telling themselves stories about themselves to protect their precious ego. And they will fight to protect their ego like they will fight to protect their actual life. In fact, maybe even more. They will put more effort and energy into defending their ego, their own self-image of what they think they are, than if there was an actual real threat to their actual life. Because that's how important it is to them. But a lot of it is just lies. It's just delusion. People have deluded themselves and they lie to themselves. So when you come along with something that is challenging this edifice that they have built around their ego, because that's what religion does, doesn't it? When you're telling people that God is telling you this is right and this is wrong, and that he's going to judge you and he's going to question you based upon what you didn't do and according to that criterion, well, many people have already decided how they want to live their life. And they've built a whole bunch of excuses about why it should be like that and why it shouldn't be like this. So anyone who comes along and challenges it, they're not going to be happy. It's not going to make them responsive. They're going to want to fight it. They're going to want to, they're either going to want to run like you'd run from a lion, right? Or they're going to want to fight. Their fight or flight response is going to kick in. Yeah. So that's why they'll be saying, I don't want to, it's their way of saying, don't have this conversation with me because I'm afraid that you're gonna destroy my fragile ego.
Yeah, this facade I've built of how I live my life, I don't want that to be challenged because I'm comfortable. And what we're doing is we're taking people outside of their comfort zones.
That exactly, bro. Very well put.
Yeah, man. I've just got a couple of wrap-up questions for you.
Yeah.
So one is, what is, obviously as Muslims, we tend to answer the Quran, but outside of the Quran, what is your favorite book?
Outside the Quran?
Yep.
What is my favorite book?
I know you said you're quite, you enjoy your reading, so if you have a couple of titles, you can hit me with a couple.
I don't tell people.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the reason is that, unfortunately, there's books that I read and I think they're amazing books, but I wouldn't recommend them to people because unfortunately, unfortunately, which is absolutely fine. But the point is, most people are, and I'm not saying I'm particularly clever, but most people are too ignorant. I've done this before. I recommended books. I said, this is an amazing book. It's a book written by an atheist, right? And it contains stuff that is totally un-Islamic. And I didn't think about that. And then people read it, Muslims read it and say, oh, how could you recommend a book that's so full of kufr? Well, because the amazing stuff is really amazing, right? But I forget that most people, bro, they don't have the filters. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the, mental capacity. They haven't put the time and the effort in to be able to filter the stuff themselves. So that's the job of someone like me. You know, my job is to take that information and then repackage it in a way that people who, you know, don't have those filters and haven't built that up can really benefit from it. So there are lots of books that are just amazing, but I'm not going to say what they are, right? You know, I'd rather say, okay, you know, what we'll do is we'll repackage that information and repackage that knowledge in a way that a Muslim can appreciate it, respect it, and benefit from it. That's what I think, you know, that's more my job. So, yeah, I mean, so apart from the Quran and, you know, the Hadith and books of Seerah, you know, yeah, that's the stuff I encourage people to read, inshallah.
Inshallah. I really agree with that point. And see, a book that I had a similar experience was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and I did enjoy that book. And at the time when
again, see, bro, I wouldn't, you know, I definitely wouldn't. I mean, there's so much stuff there that I'm on board with, right? I mean, I myself, and you know, I am a person who lives so much in the present that I would literally be hard pressed to actually put any sort of realistic dates on anything that happened more than 3 days ago. And I mean, honestly, I literally, because for me, the only really real thing is the right now. The past does not exist except in my head. The past does not exist. It stopped existing. There's only, and even what exists of it is just fragments in my brain. It doesn't exist anymore. It's gone. It's finished. And the future, it's not here. It hasn't happened. There is literally the only thing that there actually really is this exact moment right now. So this whole thing about living in the present, okay, and really appreciating it, is something deep and profound. But again, bro, you have to be very careful because people can get very confused with this. And, you know, honestly, it's like the last thing the Muslims need is to go to think that, you know, we shouldn't plan anything and we shouldn't think about the future and like the things we need to do in order to plan our future to make it effective, because that's not what it's about, right? Is it? You see? But unfortunately, you know, you know, I would be very cautious to, you know, recommend stuff like that to the average Muslim.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Because see, some of the points in it, like later in the book, it talks about enlightenment and stuff, and it kind of prophetic ideas. Yeah, and that stuff we need to look at the stuff we can take, because it kind of opened up my idea to doing salah, like that intense, like kind of focus, and that was something I could take away from it. But there were other stuff in it which were not acceptable from Islam, and it's unfortunate.
And there's so much stuff like this, bro. There's so much stuff like this. Yeah, people could benefit from meditation. Like people can benefit from doing certain yoga positions, but then yoga itself is so much infused and mixed up with other stuff that we have to be very, very careful about. And this is why many sheikhs say, they'll just say yoga is haram. They'll just say that's it. They're not going to, you know, they're not going to bother in packaging it all, because most people, they can't do it, bro. So just keep away from it and do something else. Do Pilates. It's like Pilates has got all the, you know, positive stuff without any of the spiritual confusion, mumbo jumbo stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. There's this kind of premise, and I think I got this from Dr. Zakir Naik, and he says this with looking at the Bible, and I suppose you can use this with looking at anything, is if it agrees with the Quran, that's cool, you can take it. If it's neither agrees nor... Are you with me? Oh, sorry, I thought you froze.
Yeah, the connection is breaking up, but keep going. I did get it. Okay. So if it agrees with the Quran, you take it.
We can take it. If it kind of neither agrees nor disagrees, you're just kind of agnostic about it. But if it disagrees, then you cannot accept it. It's forbidden, and I think
that's fine, bro. But how many people have taken the time to even once read the Quran in a language they can understand?
Yeah, you're right. Probably.
I wonder how many of your audience right now have read the Quran once, just once, let alone reading it over and over and over. If you've read the Quran in a language you can understand 20 times, or even better, you've learned Arabic and you study the Quran in Arabic and you know its tafsir, then okay, maybe you can begin to start doing stuff like that. But most people have never even done that. So what does that even mean, what you just said to most people, bro? because they haven't even read the Quran, so they wouldn't know how to compare anything to the Quran because they never read it.
Yeah, so that's a good starting point for anyone who's listening. Is the first book you read is the Quran before anything else.
Absolutely, not just read it, like
study it.
It should be your friend. The Quran should be your best friend. You should know the Quran like you know your best friend, right? You should hang out with it, spend time with it, chat with it, spend hours, countless hours with it. When you have that type of relationship with the Quran, and it will become your filter. It will become your filter because you've taken your deen from that, right? And then anything you come across, you will automatically say, oh, how does that fit? How does that fit with Allah? How does that fit with Allah's book? How does that fit with my friend, the Quran, right? You wouldn't want anything sitting along with the Quran that just feels even uncomfortable. So that's the precondition, right? The precondition is get to know the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, be familiar with it, inshallah.
Great answer. Okay, next question maybe will be easier is, do you have a favorite surah of the Quran?
Do I have a favorite surah? I think it sort of shifts, my favorite surah. And maybe I have maybe not a favorite surah, but maybe favorite bits of the Quran,
Yeah, what are a few of those? What are a few of those?
I don't know right now, to be honest, bro. I guess I'm at the stage where, it's hard for me to remember, but the Quran is constantly surprising me. Like, I still can't believe like how many times I've read it and something appears in it and it's like, I never saw that. How did I never see that? Like, it's almost like there is a sentence there that I just didn't even know existed. How did that happen? I've read this lots of times. And that, this is just that's the Quran. It's constantly surprising you. It's constantly coming up with something. And I guess probably because it's your life is changing. So as your life keeps changing, what Allah is saying to you is going to change as well. Like what you're picking up from it is going to change. So I don't know what right now, I guess. I don't know.
Before you tell me, before just let that question brew, right? You can tell me in a second. Yeah. But what you said about as you grow and your life changes, you take different things. It's like watching a movie. You watch a movie as a kid, you see things. You watch it again 5 years later, you realize there's different messages in it. You watch it again as an adult. There's another kind of dimension to it. And the Quran is the works of, people talk about intelligent directors. The Quran is the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's not like you read it once and then that's it. As you keep growing older and your circumstance keeps changing, there are different spiritual lessons which you can take out of the Quran.
Yeah, I think that we wouldn't want to compare the Quran to a movie, but I guess I see what you're saying in the sense that there's no doubt that there are some, some movies that are very multi-leveled, like you can, a Toy Story, for example, right? Kids can watch it and enjoy it for one thing, and an adult can watch it and enjoy it for something completely different. Or Shrek, for example. Like, I actually hated that movie the first time I saw it. The second time I saw it, I started giggling. The third time I saw it, I was literally roaring with laughter, right?
Oh, really?
And now it's become one of those things that every time I watch it, it's just like, it has me in tears, because there's these sort of things. Yeah, there's that passage and it's just so funny. And the kids just love it because it's monsters and whatever, right? So yes, you're right. It takes of course you can build that into a movie that you make, but at the end of the day, it's not, I don't think any movie is something you could read, watched every single day.
No, of course, nothing is on that level. Only the works
of Allah. You couldn't read it
Sure.
You couldn't watch it every day in your life and get that. I mean, you'd get pretty bored pretty quickly.
Yeah. After a week,
that's the incredible thing about
after a week. That's it.
You don't. It doesn't matter. I've been reading it for 36 years and it's still surprising me. I think that's unique. I don't think it's on a whole different level, right? But yeah, you got a point. I mean, from that point of view, I mean, it can happen with anything, but the Quran is especially true. And like, I don't think there's that many things that will surprise you on a deep level, right? Like, Shrek will entertain you, right? It's very rare that you're going to watch something like a movie and it's going to move you really deeply in a life-changing way, something that's going to be like, wow, that is an insight into life that, subhanallah, I never even realized, you know. So it's very rare that you get something that has that type of impact at all, let alone again and again and again.
SubhanAllah, great answer. One more question is, what's a piece of advice you've been given that you never forgot?
A piece of advice I've been given that I've never forgotten is, if you want to judge the effectiveness of a criterion, apply it universally. This is a principle one of my sheikhs taught me. Yeah, what can I say? It's one of the most, it's helped me to really sort out a lot of rubbish that people say, you know, and hopefully I've helped others think about what they're saying as if it really makes any sense. So when people say certain things about things being halal or things being haram or whatever, I suggest that they apply this principle. I say, well, if that's true about this, is it also therefore not true about that and that and that? If you apply that to this particular thing, it also has to be applied to all of those things, but you would never dream of applying it to all of those things. So why do you apply it to this thing? It's really an amazing principle. And if you understand that principle and you start using it, you will very, very quickly begin to see what makes sense in terms of claims that people make.
That's amazing. And I really like that answer. It reminded me of a friend who I think thinks in a similar way. So I'm going to share this with him. But my last question, it's an easy one, really easy, you won't need to think too hard, is where can people find you?
They can find me on Facebook and Instagram. Is probably the easiest places to find me. Facebook, Instagram, and more hopefully increasingly YouTube. But yeah, Instagram probably, if one place, Instagram, I probably spend more time on Instagram in terms of posting and answering messages. If you want to send me a message, Instagram's definitely probably the best thing to do. DM me in Instagram.
Great.
I try to get back to everyone. If I missed you, it's because I missed you, not because I'm ignoring you.
Okay. I'll put all of your links in the bio for anyone who wants to look you up. But honestly, from the bottom of my heart, Jazakallah khair for taking time out of your busy day. And I had a lot of fun talking to you. I liked your answers. And hopefully I see you in Scotland sometime. I'm going to change your opinion of Glasgow.
It may be sooner rather than later, bro. You may be seeing me soon there in Glasgow, and I expect you to take me to some proper nice halal Glaswegian places, bro.
My goal is to change your opinion of Glasgow, and I believe I can do it. I believe I absolutely can do it.
If it's got good food, bro, it won't be hard.
Yeah.
If it's good halal food, you'll
plenty of it
really easily.
Bro, there's probably more halal food in Glasgow than there is haram food in Glasgow.
Okay, bro. I'm gonna be there soon, inshallah.
Okay, just let me know. Jazakallah khair, bro.
All right, bro.